In discussions about compensating individuals for their spiritual work, it can be a sensitive subject. It's clear that pastors and missionaries need to earn a living while doing God's work, but where should we draw the line? The story of Gehazi in the Bible provides an answer to this question. As the servant of a renowned prophet, Gehazi saw an opportunity to make extra money by exploiting a wealthy man's illness. God did not let his actions go unpunished. In this article, we'll explore who Gehazi was, what he did, and why it was so wrong. Before we delve into his serious transgressions, let's examine what else the Bible tells us about him. Gehazi was first and foremost a servant to Elisha. Elisha, for those unfamiliar with him, was a protege and colleague of Elijah. When Elijah was taken up in a fiery chariot, Elisha inherited twice the amount of Elijah's power. As a result, many of Elisha's miracles closely resemble those of Elijah's. Gehazi was present for several of Elisha's miracles, such as the resurrection of a Shunammite woman's dead son, 2 Kings 4. Aside from his obedience to Elisha's commands, the Bible doesn't provide much more information about Gehazi. He appears to serve as some sort of aide. However, Gehazi's character takes a dark turn in 2 Kings 5, when a leprous man seeks him out to arrange a meeting with Elisha for healing. Naaman was an affluent individual, yet he was afflicted with a dreadful disease, leprosy. In biblical times, this term referred to a variety of skin conditions that were hard to categorize. The symptoms were usually similar to discoloration of the skin, flakiness, and in severe cases, loss of body parts due to blocked pain receptors. For an Israelite, contracting leprosy meant being ostracized, living a life of misery and isolation. Naaman, although not an Israelite but a commander of a foreign king's army, Aram, was equally distressed by his condition. He was aware that his wealth and status couldn't shield him from the social stigma associated with leprosy. He sought help from Elisha, a prophet of God. Elisha's proposed solution seemed too simplistic to Naaman washing himself 7 times in the Jordan, a notably unclean river. However, he eventually set his pride aside, followed the instructions, and was miraculously healed. He attempted to reward Elisha for his help, but Elisha declined, acknowledging that it was God's power that had healed Naaman, not his own. This is when Gehazi, Elisha's servant, comes into the picture. Unhappy about Elisha's refusal to accept a reward, Gehazi decided to take matters into his own hands. He approached Naaman and asked for a significant gift, a talent of silver and 2 sets of fine clothing. Naaman generously doubled the gift, and Gehazi returned to Elisha. Gehazi must have thought he had done well, justifying his actions by the need to provide for their needs. But Elisha was not pleased. The text suggests Gehazi intended to keep the gifts for himself. When asked by Elisha about his whereabouts, Gehazi lied. If he had planned to share the gifts with Elisha, he would have said so. Elisha saw through Gehazi's deception. He reprimanded Gehazi for accepting a bribe for a miracle that was God's doing. As a result, Gehazi left Elisha's presence with Naaman's leprosy. Quite a severe punishment. Why was Gehazi's transgression so severe? Even if Gehazi had been honest with Elisha and intended to give him the wealth, it's likely he would have faced a similar outcome. Why is this? It may seem strange that Gehazi was punished. After all, the Bible repeatedly mentions God's care for the Levites, Israel's priestly tribe. He ensures they receive portions of land and food from the other Israelites for their services. How does this differ? Here, it's crucial to distinguish between ministry work and acts of God. The Levites performed religious duties. They burned incense, sacrificed animals, and prayed for the people, among other things. These are not acts or miracles of God per se, but they are done in service to Him. Therefore, it's appropriate to compensate individuals such as pastors, youth ministers, and worship leaders, or at least, it should be. They serve their congregations in the same way the Levites served the Israelites. However, spiritual gifts such as prophecy or healing are direct acts of God. If individuals demand money for performing these acts, they are profiting from what God does, which is fundamentally wrong. Gehazi was aware that Elisha disapproved of accepting payments for God's miracles, yet he attempted to obtain money regardless. There are several instances in both the Old and New Testaments where greed leads to disaster. Achan, Ananias, and Sapphira are examples of individuals who retained what they shouldn't have and ultimately faced death as a result. The love of money is indeed the root of all evil. What lessons can we draw from Gehazi's story? The topic of money is sensitive. Many of us brace ourselves when the pastor delivers his yearly sermon on the importance of giving more. Particularly in today's economic climate, there can be a tendency to be stingy. However, Gehazi's story should serve as a sobering reminder. Gehazi attempted to exploit God for additional income. While many of us don't work for miracle workers, we should heed the warnings from Gehazi's story. It's not wrong for God's servants to be compensated, but we must seek the Holy Spirit's discernment if we're attempting to turn God into a side hustle. God's people need to meet their basic needs. However, we must avoid exploiting God's acts or gifts. It's not wrong to have volunteers, but what stands out in this passage is that Elisha performed the work without charge, while Gehazi intended to profit from Elisha's labor. It could be argued that Elisha was the first unpaid intern. Humor aside, it's nearly impossible to operate a church or ministry without volunteers. However, it's disheartening when some people in the church barely scrape by while others earn a substantial yearly income. We must look after those within our churches and the ministries we oversee. While higher positions should command higher salaries, this shouldn't be at the expense of those struggling to make ends meet. Lying is always wrong. Gehazi was fully aware of his actions. He had witnessed a literal resurrection just one chapter earlier, yet his heart was still consumed by greed. Even worse, he lied about his greed. Lies will always come to light. As Christians, honesty must be our priority, as any attempts to hide the truth will inevitably be exposed.